love it. I love it. I love it. So now we know enough that we can move on to the next portion of our creation process. And this is after making sure you're focusing on the players. This is the most important thing specifically for a vampire game, because a lot of this advice I'm throwing out here probably would work for any game, but for a vampire game, you need to make really, really good NPCs, really, really good non-player characters. I am now going to say goodbye to our subs for just a second while I go off lecturing and listening to the sound of my own voice for a little while. I'm going to lift some of this advice about how to create NPCs from a book called the Encounter Theory Workbook by Ben Riggs. And that's a really good book if you are serious about doing a lot of game mastering, because Encounter Theory is just his theory that adventures should be really open-ended. They should be completely about the players. And that they should present problems, not solutions. I mean, this is the only advantage role-playing games have over video games, is that you can literally do anything and that you can really focus on the player's ideas. And so he gives a lot of great advice on that in the Encounter Theory Workbook. But he specifically gives advice on relationship games. So there are a lot of different types of role-playing games. There's Dungeons and Dragons. There's what else? I mean, there's Call of Cthulhu, which is like a mystery solving game. Dungeons and Dragons, which is kind of like a location adventuring game, hence the dungeons, right? You travel to these locations and you investigate every room to try to kind of solve the scenario. And then there are relationship games like Vampire, which are very focused on exploring people rather than places. In Vampire, you're exploring the NPCs, so they're super important in Vampire. And so your NPCs have to have a lot of depth, and they have to want things and have plans for how they're going to get those things. So Ben Riggs, in his book, he advocates giving each of the NPCs in a relationship game a motivation, a plan, obstacles to enacting their plan, reactions when people try to stop their plan, and secrets. That's a really good list, and I recommend getting his book if you want to do it his way. That's not how I do it, but I do it in a very similar way. Motivation, I give each of my NPCs a motivation. For Vampire, I give them a date that they were embraced, so I know roughly how long they've been a vampire and kind of what culture they kind of came from in America. Like, someone embraced in the 1950s is going to be very different from someone embraced in the late 70s. And I think that that tells me a lot about that person, because I think vampires, at least in my mind, they kind of stop changing their philosophies right around the time they were embraced. I think of what their mortal life was, who are their allies, their enemies, a secret, and then most importantly, what do they want from the players? They need to want something from the players. You can create an incredible character within a huge, long backstory and all this incredible information, but unless they have a reason to hang out with or ask something of the players, they're completely useless in your chronicle. So just to kind of explain what some of these things mean, motivation makes it really easy for you to play that NPC as the storyteller. So if you know that someone's motivated by money or status or finding their lost children, you will almost always instantly know what they're going to do in any situation. I swear to God, like if you just come up with one line like, this guy wants money. And in Vegas, that would be a great motivation. This guy wants money. He's a vampire who is using vampirism just to accumulate as much wealth as he can. You know what risks he's going to be willing to take, which ones he's not going to be willing to take. So when you're playing him, you can improvise him instead of deciding on some like elaborate, detailed, like plan that he sticks to now, no matter what. You're deciding a motivation that you can improvise. So in any situation, just have him decide to go where the money is. Likewise, someone who's like trying to find their children, you kind of know what that person, what their decisions are going to be, regardless of what they are faced with. Okay. Embrace date. I explained why I like that. It just kind of gives a kind of a sense of, how long this person's been a vampire, how much vampire is in them versus how much human is in them, that kind of thing. Mortal life. So people would be tempted to write an entire backstory for someone's mortal life. Don't do that. You can literally write one line. I think for the sheriff of Pittsburgh, Churchill Jackson, I just had strikebreaker. Back before he was embraced, he was a guy that broke strikes. That tells you a ton about that character. So you can really just write a job or, something simple like we just did for those PCs here. Card dealer, down on his luck IT guy. That's enough for an NPC as well. And then allies, that lets you know who will back them in a conflict. This is usually the only way that I use allies and enemies. Who will back them in a conflict? So when your player characters mess with one NPC and suddenly this other NPC comes, from the side and they're like, what's he doing here? It's because they were allies. And then enemies, who will that NPC be in conflict with? If they're sending the player characters on missions or quests, they're probably sending them to go mess with or do something that would make that enemy angry. Secrets, or as Nexium calls it, collateral. Secrets are a thing that if the social group around the NPC found out, that NPC would be in very deep doo-doo. And not everyone needs to have like a dark, super melodramatic secret. I had a NPC in one of my games whose secret was just that he was incompetent, that he acted like he was very kind of competent and skilled and successful, but in truth, only he knew that he had never once succeeded at anything. He was just a yes man. And if the people around him found that out, or that he thought that of himself, it would be devastating. So I'm just going to write all of these down. Let's see here. It's motivation. Let's say NPCs, and we want motivation, embrace date, allies, enemies, secrets. I forgot mortal life. And what do they want from the players? What do they want from the players? And when we talk about what they want from the players, like it could just be that they want any group of neonates they can get to help them start a blood cult. Or it could be just that they want the players dead. They want to destroy the players. They don't like that the players exist. But it's probably a little better if this question, what do they want from the players, is personal. If they personally know the player characters and they have an issue with them or a beef with them, or they are friends with them and they want something from them because of that, that's going to be just a little juicier. And the reason is, again, you're hooking in your players and you're doing things that matter to them. They're not fighting some organization they've never heard of and have no real connection to. They're fighting someone who is their former best friend. And I swear to you, players respond to that kind of thing. So let's come up with 3 NPCs. And I really think you only need 3 NPCs to get started in a Vampire Chronicle. Maybe you'll create more later. But to begin with, you only need 3, and you only need to answer these questions about them. So let's bring in our subs again. Here we go. Okay. So Clancy, do you have an idea for an NPC? And you don't need to have a name. You don't need to have it thoroughly thought out. It's really off the top of your head. There are no wrong answers here.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess you would have the person in charge.
The person in charge. So who do we think that is? Like, let's just come up with one line about them.
And they're a vampire, or it doesn't matter?
It really doesn't matter, actually. That's another good point. You can create. I mean, your Chronicle could have 3 important NPCs, and 2 of them are humans. It's like that would make your Chronicle unique, I think. Like, we're always like thinking we have to have this like big network of vampires, but there could be a couple of humans involved.
Well, if it's the mafia, it could be the
local Don.
Yeah, the local Don.
Yep, great. The local mafia Don. Great. And let's see. Let's answer all these questions about him. What's his motivation?
He wants to keep Las Vegas under mafia rule, I would think, even with the vampires around.
Okay, so wait, are you saying he doesn't want the vampires ruling things? He wants the mafia to rule things.
Yeah, I would think he would want the mafia to rule things.
Okay.
We're assuming Disney hasn't taken over.
Well, that's interesting too, right? Because Vegas is kind of weirdly Disney in some ways now too. Okay, so that's his motivation.
Yeah.
And what's his embrace state? Oh no, he wasn't embraced. We're thinking he's a human, right?
Yeah.
Don't need that.
Human, but I mean, I don't know. Maybe the mafia would be aware of vampires? And
that's huge. Okay, so like
would they know and have been working with the vampires and maybe just wanting to bring it back to human rule?
Well, yeah, these are all great. I think that like just saying that they know about vampires is huge because they're not supposed to. So now they're an enemy of like here. That's his enemies are probably the Camarilla. They're probably the ones who are trying to kind of take control of the businesses. I don't really see the Anarchs doing that as much. Or do we think it's the Anarchs?
No, I would think Camarilla.
Yeah, and then
they're a lot more organized.
Yeah, exactly. And then
Anarchs might even side with the mafia.
It sounds like we'll just make a note that like let's see, we'll make it a secret. His secret is knows vampires exist. I mean, that's a huge problem for him. Like if like his business contacts know that he believes that there are vampires and that he is using his soldiers to kind of like attack them. Like, I mean, the mafia doesn't like to get into scrapes if they can possibly help it. They like to run almost semi-legitimate businesses. So, this guy knows vampires exist, and that's a huge issue for him.
Right.
And let's see, he needs allies, though. Does he have a kindred ally, or is he allied with the Second Inquisition, or what do we think?
Or could he be allied with Anarchs even?
He's allied with the Anarchs.
I like it.
I mean, this is a giant, interesting NPC right now. And here's the coolest thing about it, Clancy, I really think, is that because, he's a mortal mafia don, right? So normally if your characters were like humans, it would be hard to get to go see him and to have any sway over him or be able to kind of affect him because he's a person with a great deal of power. But now we're dealing with some of the cool things about vampire, which is just by being a neonate vampire, you're almost as powerful as he is, right? Like you're this like supernatural being that has the power to control minds or transform your body. So if you come and ask for a meeting with this guy, he's probably going to give it to you. And it lets our players like routinely meet with like a really big power broker in the city and actually affect things that happen in the city, even though they are just neonate vampires. And you're really looking for ways that your players can do big stuff because it's boring to do little stuff. And I have run games and I've been in so many games where the game master keeps going, well, you really wouldn't be able to like go and talk to the king because like that's the king. So you're not able to get in the room. And that's boring. Fuck that. So I love that the biggest mafia don in our city is probably because he's allies with the Anarchs. He's trying to use the Anarchs to fuck with the Camarilla. He's probably going to agree to meet with a down on his luck IT guy that's been turned into a vampire. He's probably going to agree to meet with a croupier that's been turned into a vampire, even though those don't seem, offhand like really powerful positions. They're powerful to this guy. So that's a really cool, interesting NPC. Let's create another one. Let's create, who's our next one? Nick, what do you got for me?
The ambitious Camarilla enforcer, whose motivation, I
love it.
I'm thinking like complex character. Somebody the players could really like, but they're always questioning what their motivations are.
Right. Okay. So what is his motivation? Let's figure that out right now. What's he want?
Get to the top.
He wants to become prince.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So he wants power. So he's just an enforcer, like you say. He's muscle, but he's politically motivated, which, you know, that's interesting because often these kind of like soldier type characters, we treat them as like, oh, I'm simple. I only care about honor. You know what I mean? But now you're going to have, you know, this guy who's like a foot soldier, maybe, or what do you think? Do you think he's the sheriff, or do you think he's like kind of lower down?
I think he's lower down, but I think he's potentially more than just a foot soldier, like maybe sheriff right-hand man. Yeah, lieutenant.
Sheriff's right-hand man. I'm gonna write that down because it's really good.
And even the sheriff doesn't know if he trusts them. Like enemies could be higher up Cam in some capacity. Not all of them, but some of them know that he's gunning for the top, right?
That's really cool. What year do you think he was embraced? And then you could literally pick it off the top of your head. Like
1998.
1998. That suddenly tells us a ton about this guy. Like, I like for my vampires, you don't have to do this in your game, but I like for my vampires to kind of dress from the date that they were embraced. Nice. I kind of feel like their psychology kind of gets frozen then. 1998 is such a flavorful, funny year for this guy to kind of become a vampire. And I like that because he would be right around. So he's been a vampire for about 20 years. He'd be at the place where he'd be itching to kind of move up, you know, and he might be realizing that there isn't a lot of upward mobility in the Camarilla. Who are his? Wait, we have to do allies first. Who are his allies, do you think?
I think the Mafia Don secretly.
Oh. And who are his enemies?
Some other Cam, for sure.
The guy that's gunning for his position, right? Like the guy that's another Cam,
and maybe the guy or girl whose position he's gunning for too, and they have an idea of how ambitious he is.
That's better. His enemy is actually the sheriff. He's the sheriff's right-hand man, but his enemy is actually the sheriff.
Yeah, it's a complicated relationship.
It's a extremely fraught and dangerous relationship, and his secret is he's working with the Mafia Don, right? I mean, that's very obvious. Like if that's found out, it's going to be a huge problem for him. I mean, this is amazing. I love this. Okay, so let's now go to Greg. Greg, do we have a third idea for a third person?
I think that Las Vegas needs an information broker.
Ooh, so good.
Great. An information broker, and what is his deal? What's his motivation?
So for some reason, I'm imagining someone who gets their information because they control all of the like hand slappers outside the casinos. The guys who like slap the
cards,
the like call girl cards into your hands.
Interesting. So he runs
he has like a network of people that see everything on the street.
Right. Okay. Man, I love that. Okay.
But I think their motivation would be like respectability. Like they have like an information network, but it's seen as low rent.
I love that. So he wants to be respected. He wants to be, liked, admired.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, everybody thinks he's or she is a disgusting kind of bootlicking spy, right? I mean,
right.
That's the situation they're in now. When do you think that this vampire was embraced? By the way, it's screaming Nosferatu to me as well.
Yeah, definitely.
When do you think this vampire was embraced?
I think that maybe like the I don't know, maybe like the 40s or 50s.
Ooh, like, so this guy's been around for forever and still doesn't get the respect he deserves.
Right. They've been around, they're like a foundational part of Las Vegas, but they're from when it was extra greasy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, their power base is from like a part of Vegas that is being like pushed out by by the Disneyfication of the
Disneyfication. I love it. That's great. He's the oldest vampire we've shown so far. I mean, we can assume there's a prince floating around somewhere, and you might go, "It's a vampire chronicle. Where's the prince?" Well, the prince isn't as important as these three people in our game. The prince is off out there somewhere. Maybe you have a name for him, but he's not as important as these three people in the game we're going to play. You got to narrow it down, and if you're constantly worried about if you're mapping out the entire social structure of every vampire in Las Vegas, you're going to be doing a lot of work that you don't use, that doesn't really affect the players. Let's see. What are this guy's allies? Who are his allies? It sounds like mortals. It sounds like he keeps like a bunch of mortals like on a payroll who are willing to do favors for him, right?
Like a network of
network of spies who are actually act as those guys that give out the flyers.
Right, and there's a lot of them, but they're kind of limited usefulness because they're the guys that hand out flyers.
Yeah,
like, he has quantity, but maybe not quality.
Yeah, and who are his enemies? Who is disrespecting him? That's the thing. To me, it would be like someone younger in the vampire world who doesn't do things old school, right?
Right. Maybe some sort of if we're talking like vampires, maybe some sort of like venture coterie that have been pushing in the Disney-fied Vegas. So there are people who are trying to clean up and modernize everything, and they still have this sort of old school relic.
And they hate him. They disrespect him. They don't use his resources that he is so very generously offered to him. Oh yeah, fuck these licks, man. Okay, so these are great, fantastic NPCs. The one step we need to do for each of them is, what do they want from our PCs, right? What does the local Mafia Don want from our PCs? Well, let's see. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? I think that he wants vampires that can go up against the Camarilla for him, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think he'd want that. He'd probably want information too.
Yeah. So either against the cam or with the cam.
Yeah.
He wants vampires who can go up against the cam or who are in the cam.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. So now your players can decide to be Anarchs or Camarilla, and he still has a thing that he wants from them. So that's great. Okay, so now let's look at our Enforcer. What does he want from the PCs?
Allies. More allies, potentially.
Fall in under his leadership, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then as an Enforcer, if they don't, he'll bust their heads. He'll be harder. He'll enforce the Masquerade harder on them. And I can see a couple things happening. So there's choice baked into this guy, because he can go like, follow my lead. And if your players are like, I don't like this guy, I'm not going to do that, then he's going to be like, oh, fuck you. And he's going to start like hitting them for every breach of the Masquerade. And he's going to start keeping an eye on them and doing all kinds of things to make their lives harder. But if they do favors for him, he makes their lives easier. So I think he is a real son of a bitch, and he'll be interesting to play. And your characters get a choice with him. He's not just some quest giver. He's like a guy where they can say yes or no to him, and then that will affect the game. So I think that's cool. And then what is our information broker? Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and make him a Nosferatu, because what does our Nosferatu information broker want from the PCs?
I think that they want maybe to be attached to the PCs as like to attach themselves to like rising stars, like relevance, basically.
He needs his own rising stars to remain relevant. That's so complex, but also kind of cool. He's going to be like really kind of rooting for them, which is a relationship you don't really get in Vampire a lot. Like usually it feels like people create vampire games where everybody is scheming against you. But what if there's a guy scheming to help you? And but he's also not awesome at it, but sometimes he is.
But also, they're kind of like an agent where they have a vested interest in your success. But if it becomes clear that you're not worth like the investment, like you will just be cut loose.
Yes.
So you still have to remain like like the players would still have to be like useful or you know, it's a weird relationship, right? Because he's like sort of helping them, but also indirectly employing them.
He's a really good yardstick of how you're doing in the vampire community, kind of, right? Because the more he wants you to succeed, the more you succeed, the more he's going to be like, yeah, I'm with these guys. And then the more you fail, he's going to be like, I don't know, they were doing a little bit of errands for me. I'm not really with them. Okay, great. We have 3 incredible NPCs, and I swear to God, that's all you need for your game to start. And also stats. If you want to, if it really makes you joyful to create stats, please go ahead and do it. I prefer to just open the book to all the stats they've already given you and use those. So I'm giving away some secrets here. I really believe in like low work, high fun in games. And so I really recommend you looking at the stats in the rule book and changing them a little bit. If it doesn't really make sense for a Mafia Don to have that much leadership versus, you know, this many dots of leadership, then go ahead and change it on the fly. But I don't recommend like spending hours and hours of your life statting everybody up. The stuff we have here, their motivation, their allies, what they want from the players is much more important, and it'll let you know how to play them in any given moment. So I really love these. I really love these NPCs. Let's go on to, we only have 2 more things we have to do to create our Chronicle. So I'm going to say bye to the subs for a second while I talk about the fact that you need locations. Okay.